No tripod? What's going on? G'day and welcome to another episode of Ian Smissen's Photography. Today I'm going to be having a crack at creativity challenge number 5, which is intentional camera movement. So I don't want a tripod. I want to be deliberately hand holding the camera. The tide's going out, so there's some nice sandy beach, followed by a rock platform, followed by waves breaking over the edge of the rock platform and the rough sea in the background, and then this interesting cloudy sky. Now that in itself would be an okay shot, but what I'm going to try and do here is deliberately move the camera during the shot to try and blur what I get, but do that in a way that I exploit what I'm looking at in the image to enhance it by enhancing the lines by the deliberate movement. But the real challenge is finding the right combination of shutter speed, speed of movement, and the angle of, or the focal length of the lens that you're using. I've got a 24 to 70 millimeter lens on this camera at the moment, so I'm going to try some different focal lengths. But the narrower the focal length is, the slower your movement has to be if you want to get some level of detail in the image, because the amount of detail that you see is dependent on the relative movement of those objects as they pass across the frame. So the first thing I've done is switch the camera over to 2-second self-timer. What this allows me to do is to click the shutter, start moving the camera in the direction that I want to move it in, and then have the shutter fire off during that movement, rather than click, move, and then have it stop. What I want to do is to have this continuous movement during the exposure, so I don't have a still part at the beginning and or the end, which will detract from the movement that I'm getting. So I want a shutter speed of around a half a second as a starting point to see what sort of blur that gives me and whether it's interesting or not. I might have to reduce that shutter speed, and I can do that quite easily just by opening up the aperture a little bit, or close it down a bit to increase it. And before I do that, I'll just switch over to video and show you the sort of thing that I'll be looking at. So I'm going to be moving about that speed. It's not very fast. It looks okay on video, but we'll see what happens when I try and do that with an exposure of about half a second in the middle. And a little random one on the way back to the car. This is the Australian surfers version of the locks on bridges phenomenon. Pretty cool, isn't it? G'day. I'm here in the forest down just past Torquay before you get to Anglesey, and I'm going to start taking some photos here with the intentional camera movement being vertical. Shooting on the beach before, we were taking them horizontally to get that blur horizontally because the primary lines in that shot are horizontal. Here, obviously, the primary lines are vertical. So I've got a 3-stop neutral density filter and a polarizer on here, which has given me 5 stops. The 6th stop is just too much because obviously it's much darker here than it was originally at the beach. So the same problem arises when you're taking these shots as we saw previously, and that is trying to find the ideal combination of shutter speed, the amount of movement, and the focal length of the lens. So I'm going to try and find the right combination of vertical lines in here to make an interesting composition, because even though I'm blurring it, I still want the composition to be interesting in the way the lines are working and the colours are working within it. So I've found a spot here which has got a combination of some dead bracken and living bracken. So it's got the browns and the greens in the foreground, and some dark burnt bark on some of these trees in the foreground and midground, and then just disappearing off with the forest disappearing down the hill in front of me to give me a depth perception as well. Now obviously I'm not going to have that in focus once it's blurred out, but I still want to be able to get different lines in the foreground, midground and background. So we'll give it a go and see how that works. Now I'm shooting that at about 40 millimeters. As I get to the top of the movement, I'm just getting the sky in it. And that adds a little bit of interest, but I'm going to try and get a few shots with a little bit less movement. So I'm going to have to zoom in just a little bit so that I still get the same relative amount of movement, because I like the sort of blur I was getting. And the more I zoom in, the more relative movement I'm going to get for the same amount of physical movement in that time. So we'll give that another crack. I think that's pretty good for here. What I'm now going to do though is to go around and look for some areas with not so much the verticals, but some of these sort of broken scrubby branches and things on the ground, to see if we can do some different sorts of movements, some twisting movements and so on, because we've looked at horizontals and verticals, but you don't have to just move the camera horizontally or vertically. There's a number of different ways obviously that you can move it. We'll try a few different things here and see how we go with those. Well, that's a bit of fun. It's always a challenge to find the right amount of movement and the right amount of messing around with the camera and the right shutter speed and focal length, and 95% of it turns out to be complete rubbish and you throw them away, but occasionally you get a few gems, and we'll have a look at those when we get back home in the office. So thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed this one, and remember, pixels are free, so keep on shooting. Bye for now. I'm going to take some more shots.